They said I would never be like her epic family revenge story. The day they told me I'd never measure up to my perfect sister, I made a promise that would change everything forever. My name is Sarah Martinez, and this is the story of how I went from being a disappointing daughter, to proving that sometimes the family black sheep becomes the brightest star of all. The smell of my mother's famous apple pie filled our suburban home in Westchester County, New York, on that crisp October afternoon in 2019. It was one of those picture-perfect fall days where the maple trees in our front yard displayed brilliant shades of red and gold, and the whole neighborhood looked like something out of a Hallmark movie. But inside our pristine white colonial house with its perfectly manicured lawn and white picket fence, the atmosphere was anything but picture-perfect. I was sitting at our mahogany dining table, the same table where we'd had countless family dinners over the years, staring at my report card with a mixture of shame and frustration. 3 B's, 2 C's, and 1 A in art class. For most families, this might have been cause for encouragement or at least mild concern. For the Martinez family, it was evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. "Sarah, we need to talk," my mother, Patricia Martinez, said as she entered the dining room. At 48, my mother was still strikingly beautiful, with her perfectly styled auburn hair that she had touched up every 6 weeks at the most expensive salon in town, and her flawless makeup that never seemed to smudge, even after a full day of managing her real estate business. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, paired with perfectly pressed slacks and pearl earrings that had been a gift from my father on their 20th wedding anniversary. Behind her walked my father, Robert Martinez, a successful investment banker who worked in Manhattan and commuted every day on Metro North. At 52, he maintained the same athletic build he'd had in college, thanks to his religious devotion to his personal trainer and the home gym he'd built in our basement. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled, and even at home on a Saturday afternoon, he wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt that looked like it had just come from the dry cleaner. But the person who made my stomach drop wasn't either of my parents. It was my older sister, Emily, who glided into the room behind them with that confident smile that had been her trademark since we were children. At 19, Emily was everything I wasn't, and everything my parents wished I could be. Emily was a sophomore at Harvard University, majoring in economics with a minor in international relations. She had graduated as valedictorian from our private preparatory school, Westchester Academy, with a perfect 4.0 GPA and a list of extracurricular achievements that read like a resume for a future world leader. Student body president, captain of the debate team, founder of the school's volunteer tutoring program, and winner of the state science fair for 3 consecutive years. She spoke fluent Spanish, French, and was working on Mandarin. She played piano at a near-professional level and had won numerous regional competitions. But beyond her academic and extracurricular achievements, Emily possessed something that couldn't be taught or learned, an effortless charisma that drew people to her like moths to a flame. She was tall and elegant, standing at 5 feet 7 inches with long, silky black hair that always fell perfectly around her shoulders, striking green eyes that seemed to sparkle with intelligence and warmth, and a smile that could light up any room she entered. She had inherited the best features from both our parents, my mother's refined bone structure and my father's natural athleticism. "Hi, Sarah," Emily said, settling into the chair across from me with that gentle, sympathetic expression she always wore when my parents were about to have one of their talks with me. She was home for fall break, and as always, her presence seemed to make everything in our house shine a little brighter. Even her casual college attire, jeans and a Harvard sweatshirt, looked effortlessly chic on her. I, on the other hand, had always been what people politely called the other Martinez daughter. At 16, I was shorter than Emily by 4 inches. With a rounder face, broader shoulders, and what my mother delicately referred to as a more athletic build, code for the fact that I didn't have Emily's naturally slim figure. My hair was the same black as Emily's, but it had an annoying tendency to frizz in humidity, and my eyes were brown instead of green. I wasn't ugly, but I wasn't the kind of girl who turned heads when she walked into a room. More importantly, I wasn't the kind of student who brought home report cards that made parents beam with pride. Sarah, my father began, sitting down at the head of the table and placing his reading glasses on his nose as he examined my report card for what felt like the 100th time that day. We're disappointed, but not surprised. Those 6 words hit me like a physical blow. Not surprised. As if my mediocrity was so predictable, so inevitable, that they had already accepted it as an unchangeable fact of nature. Your sister, my mother continued, settling into her chair and folding her hands in that way she did when she was about to deliver what she considered to be wisdom, has always been exceptional. Even as a small child, Emily showed signs of remarkable intelligence and determination. Do you remember, Robert, when she taught herself to read at age 4? Of course, my father replied, his face lighting up the way it always did when they talked about Emily's achievements. And when she won the spelling bee in 3rd grade, beating students from all over the county. Or when she started that lemonade stand and turned it into a neighborhood business empire by age 10, my mother added with obvious pride. She's always been a natural leader, a natural achiever. Emily sat quietly through this recitation of her childhood accomplishments, occasionally offering a modest smile or a gentle "Mom, you're embarrassing me," but never actually looking embarrassed. This was a familiar routine in our household. The cataloging of Emily's success stories, usually in direct contrast to whatever failure or disappointment I had just provided. The thing is, Sarah, my father said, turning his attention back to me and my disappointing report card, we've tried everything with you. Private tutors, study groups, organizational systems, reward structures. Nothing seems to work. Maybe. My mother said, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver what she considered a difficult truth. It's time we accepted that not everyone is cut out for academic excellence. Not everyone can be like Emily. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Not everyone can be like Emily. It was a phrase I'd heard variations of my entire life, but somehow, hearing it stated so bluntly, so matter-of-factly, felt like having my deepest fears confirmed by the people who were supposed to believe in me most. I know this is hard to hear, Emily said, her voice gentle and filled with what I'm sure she thought was compassion. But Mom and Dad are right. You shouldn't feel bad about not being academically gifted. You have other strengths. What strengths? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed my question was deafening. My parents exchanged glances, clearly struggling to come up with an answer. Emily bit her lower lip, a habit she'd had since childhood when she was thinking hard about something. Well, my mother finally said, you're very creative. Art has always been your best subject. And you're persistent, my father added, though his tone suggested he was grasping at straws. You don't give up easily. Those are important qualities, Emily chimed in, her voice filled with the kind of encouraging tone you might use with a small child. Not everyone needs to be a Harvard student or win academic awards. The world needs artists and people who work hard. The condescension in her words, however well-intentioned, was suffocating. Here was my sister, barely older than me, already positioned as the voice of wisdom and authority in our family. At 19, Emily was treated as an equal by our parents. Consulted on family decisions, asked for her opinions on everything from vacation destinations to investment strategies. Meanwhile, at 16, I was still being spoken to like a child who needed basic life concepts explained to her. What we're trying to say, Sarah, my father continued, is that it might be time to lower your expectations and find a more realistic path for your future. Community college, perhaps, followed by a practical career that doesn't require extensive academic achievement. Your father and I have been discussing it, my mother said, and we think it would be best if you focused on developing practical skills. Maybe a vocational program after high school. Something in beauty or hospitality management. Beauty or hospitality management. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. While Emily was destined for Wall Street or Washington, D.C., changing the world with her brilliance and charisma, I was being steered toward a career styling hair or managing restaurant reservations. But what if I want to go to college? I asked, my voice barely audible. Sweetheart, my mother said, her tone both gentle and patronizing, college is expensive, and it's not for everyone. We've already committed to supporting Emily through Harvard, and then likely graduate school. It wouldn't be fair to waste money on college tuition for someone who isn't academically inclined. The brutal honesty of her statement took my breath away. They weren't just saying I wasn't smart enough for college, they were saying I wasn't worth the investment. Emily was worth $200,000 in tuition costs, plus room and board, plus graduate school. I was worth community college and beauty school. Look at it this way, Emily said, leaning forward with that earnest expression she wore when she was trying to be helpful. Some people are meant to be leaders and innovators. Others are meant to be supporters and service providers. Both roles are important in society. Emily's words, spoken with such casual certainty, revealed something profound about how my family viewed me. I wasn't just the less successful daughter, I was fundamentally different, operating in a completely separate category of human potential. Emily was a leader and innovator. I was a supporter and service provider. We're not trying to be cruel, my father said, mistaking my silence for acceptance. We're trying to be realistic. It's better to set appropriate expectations now than to set you up for disappointment later. Appropriate expectations. The phrase rang in my ears like a bell tolling my doom. While Emily's expectations included changing the world, mine apparently included learning to be satisfied with mediocrity. The important thing, my mother added, is that you find something you're good at and that makes you happy. Success isn't just about academic achievement or prestigious careers. But even as she said those words, I could see in her eyes that she didn't really believe them. Success, in the Martinez family, was exactly about academic achievement and prestigious careers. It was about Harvard acceptance letters and perfect GPAs and being the kind of daughter you could brag about at country club dinners and parent-teacher conferences. I was the kind of daughter you made excuses for. Maybe you could work for Emily someday, my mother suggested with the kind of enthusiasm people reserve for brilliant ideas. When she starts her own business or goes into politics, she'll need loyal, hard-working people on her team. The suggestion that my highest aspiration should be working for my sister someday was the final straw. Not working with her, not partnering with her, but working for her. Even in my mother's most optimistic vision of my future, I was still subordinate to Emily, still the supporting character in her starring role. I think that's enough for now, my father said, apparently deciding that I'd been sufficiently educated about my limitations. Sarah, we want you to really think about what we've discussed today. And remember, this comes from a place of love. We want what's best for you. As my parents left the dining room, Emily lingered behind. For a moment, I thought she might offer some words of encouragement, some acknowledgement that our parents had been unnecessarily harsh. Instead, she placed her hand on my shoulder with that gentle, superior smile that had become her trademark. Sarah, I want you to know that I think you're going to find your place in the world, she said. It might not be Harvard or Wall Street, but that doesn't mean it's not important. The world needs people who are willing to work hard in supporting roles. Supporting roles. There it was again, the clear delineation between Emily's destiny as a star and mine as a background player. And hey, she added with what I'm sure she thought was sisterly affection, at least you'll never have the pressure I have. Everyone expects so much from me all the time. Sometimes I envy how relaxed your life can be. With that, she gave my shoulder a little squeeze and headed upstairs to her room, which had remained exactly as she'd left it when she went to Harvard, a shrine to academic achievement, with trophy cases full of awards, walls covered with certificates and honor roll recognitions, and a desk that still held her perfectly organized notes from her senior year of high school. I sat alone at the dining table, staring at my report card and feeling like I was drowning in the weight of my family's collective disappointment. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across our perfectly appointed dining room with its antique furniture and family portraits that told the story of the Martinez family's success and respectability. But as I looked At those family portraits, formal studio shots where Emily always stood confidently in the center while I seemed to fade into the background, something inside me began to change. It started as a small spark of anger, but quickly grew into something much more powerful: determination. They said I would never be like Emily. They said I should accept my limitations and find my place in the supporting cast of life. They said I wasn't worth the investment of a college education or the expectations of real success. But sitting there in that dining room, surrounded by evidence of everything I supposedly wasn't capable of achieving, I made a promise to myself that would change everything. I would prove them wrong. Not just wrong, but spectacularly, undeniably, impossibly wrong. I didn't know how yet, and I didn't know when, but I knew with absolute certainty that someday I would achieve something so extraordinary, so impossible to ignore, that my family would have no choice but to acknowledge that they had been blind to who I really was. The girl they saw as the disappointing daughter, the supporting character, the one who would never be like Emily, was going to show them exactly what she was capable of. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be about proving my worth. It would be about proving that their perfect daughter, their Harvard star, their golden child, had competition she never saw coming. That evening, I went up to my room and closed the door behind me. My room was the physical manifestation of everything I wasn't in my family's eyes. While Emily's room next door was a monument to achievement, mine was simply ordinary. The walls were painted a soft blue that my mother had chosen when I was 12, thinking it would be calming for someone of my temperament. My desk was cluttered with art supplies and half-finished projects, evidence of the only area where I showed any real talent. My bookshelf held a mix of young adult novels and art books, nothing that would impress college admissions officers or suggest intellectual sophistication. But that night, as I sat at my cluttered desk and opened my laptop, I wasn't thinking about what my room represented. I was thinking about transformation. I began researching art schools, art programs, and artists who had achieved international recognition. I read about Georgia O'Keeffe, who faced dismissal from male critics but became one of America's most celebrated artists. I read about Frida Kahlo, who used her pain to create art that spoke to millions. I read about contemporary artists who had come from nowhere and transformed not just their own lives, but the entire art world. For the first time in my life, I wasn't comparing myself to Emily. I was envisioning a future where Emily would be comparing herself to me. I started keeping a journal that night, writing down my goals, my dreams, and my plans. The first entry was simple but powerful. October 15, 2019. Today they told me I would never be like Emily. They're right. I'm going to be better. The Monday morning after that devastating family dinner, I walked into Westchester Academy with a completely different mindset. The familiar hallways lined with trophy cases and achievement boards that had always made me feel inadequate now seemed like motivation rather than mockery. Every banner celebrating academic excellence, every photograph of distinguished alumni, every reminder of the high standards expected at our prestigious private school now fueled the fire that had been lit inside me. Westchester Academy was exactly the kind of school you'd expect the Martinez family to choose for their daughters. Founded in 1952, it boasted ivy-covered brick buildings, perfectly manicured grounds, and a student body that read like a who's who of the New York metropolitan area's elite families. The annual tuition was $45,000 per student, and the waiting list to get in was longer than the enrollment roster. My parents never missed an opportunity to mention that both Emily and I attended one of the finest preparatory schools in the country. But as I walked through those hallways that morning, past clusters of perfectly dressed students discussing their weekend activities in the Hamptons or their family's upcoming ski trips to Aspen, I realized something important: being surrounded by privilege and high expectations didn't automatically make you exceptional. It just made you entitled to opportunities that most people never got. The question was, what was I going to do with those opportunities? My first class of the day was AP Art History with Mrs. Vandenberg, a woman in her 60s who had taught at Westchester Academy for over 30 years and was rumored to have personally known several famous artists in her younger days. She was intimidating in the way that only truly knowledgeable people can be, with her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, her tailored blazers that probably cost more than my family's monthly grocery budget, and her ability to discuss Renaissance painting techniques with the same casual ease that most people talked about the weather. "Miss Martinez," she said as I took my seat in the front row, a seat I had chosen deliberately that morning, part of my new commitment to being actively engaged rather than passively present. "I hope you've given some thought to our discussion about your final project for this semester." The final project for AP Art History was worth 40% of our semester grade and was supposed to be an original research paper on any artist or artistic movement of our choosing. Most students picked safe, well-researched topics like the influence of Renaissance art on modern design, or Impressionism, a revolutionary approach to light and color. The kind of topics that were easy to research, had plenty of existing scholarship, and virtually guaranteed a solid B+ if you put in reasonable effort. But sitting there that morning, with my family's words still echoing in my head, I realized that solid B+ wasn't going to be enough anymore. If I was going to prove that I was capable of excellence, I needed to start by exceeding every expectation, beginning with this class. "Actually, Mrs. Vandenberg," I said, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice, "I'd like to propose something different for my final project." She raised an eyebrow, a gesture that in her repertoire could mean anything from mild interest to complete dismissal. "I want to research contemporary female artists who have overcome significant personal or societal obstacles to achieve international recognition. But instead of just writing a paper, I'd like to create an original art exhibition proposal, complete with curatorial notes, marketing materials, and a presentation that could actually be used by a real gallery." The classroom fell silent. Even my classmates, who were typically more focused on their phones than on class discussions, looked up with interest. This was way beyond the scope of what anyone had attempted for an AP Art History project at Westchester Academy. Mrs. Vandenberg studied me for a long moment, her sharp blue eyes seeming to look right through me. "Miss Martinez, what you're proposing would be graduate-level work. Are you certain you're prepared for that kind of commitment?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied without hesitation. "I want to challenge myself." "Very well," she said, making a note in her grade book. "But I expect professional quality work. No exceptions, no extensions, no partial credit for good intentions. If you're going to attempt something this ambitious, you need to deliver results." After class, I went straight to the library, a magnificent space with floor-to-ceiling windows, mahogany tables that had been donated by alumni, and a collection that included first-edition art books worth more than most people's cars. I found a quiet corner table and opened my laptop, ready to begin the most ambitious academic project I had ever attempted. But this was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, I threw myself into research with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. I reached out to contemporary female artists through social media and email, requesting interviews about their career journeys. I contacted gallery directors and museum curators, asking about the process of organizing exhibitions. I spent hours studying exhibition catalogs, learning about lighting, spacing, and the subtle art of guiding viewers through a visual narrative. My art teacher, Mr. Kowalski, noticed the change in my approach immediately. "Sarah, your work lately has been exceptional," he said after reviewing my latest painting, a complex composition that incorporated techniques I had researched from 3 different artistic traditions. "There's a level of intentionality and sophistication that I haven't seen from you before." "I've been pushing myself to do better," I replied, which was both completely true and completely inadequate to describe the transformation I was experiencing. The truth was, I had discovered something about myself that no one in my family had ever acknowledged. I was capable of obsessive dedication when I found something I was passionate about. While Emily's excellence seemed effortless and natural, mine was going to be hard-won and deliberately constructed. But that didn't make it any less real or valuable. At home, my newfound intensity went largely unnoticed. My parents were busy with their own careers and social obligations, and Emily was back at Harvard, sending regular updates about her internship applications for the following summer. She was choosing between Goldman Sachs and the State Department. When I mentioned my art history project at dinner, my mother nodded approvingly and said, "That's nice, dear. It's good to see you applying yourself in your strong subject." My strong subject. As if art was the consolation prize for not being good at real academic subjects. But I was learning something that my family had never taught me: excellence. In any field required the same fundamental qualities: research, dedication, critical thinking, and the ability to synthesize complex information into original insights. The subject matter was different, but the intellectual rigor was identical. I started staying after school every day, working in the art studio until the custodial staff kicked me out. I read art history books, philosophy texts, and cultural criticism essays that were far beyond my grade level. I learned about postmodern feminist theory, the intersection of art and politics, and the ways that visual culture both reflects and shapes societal values. For the first time in my academic career, I was encountering ideas that genuinely excited me, concepts that kept me awake at night not because I was worried about failing a test, but because I was eager to explore them further. "Sarah, you've been working really hard lately," my father observed one evening as I carried a stack of library books up to my room. "It's good to see you taking your studies seriously." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, not bothering to mention that I was probably putting in more hours of actual intellectual work than I ever had in my life. "Just remember not to overdo it," my mother added from the kitchen. "We don't want you to burn yourself out or get frustrated when things don't come as easily as they do for Emily." There it was again, the assumption that I was fundamentally limited, that I should pace myself to avoid the disappointment of reaching my natural ceiling. Even when I was working harder than I ever had before, they couldn't imagine that I might be capable of achieving something genuinely impressive. But their low expectations had become fuel rather than discouragement. Every time someone suggested that I should be realistic about my limitations, I worked another hour. Every time someone implied that I would never be like Emily, I pushed myself to prove that I could be better than Emily in my own field. In November, I received my first response from one of the artists I had contacted for my project. Melina Rodriguez was a Mexican-American painter who had grown up in East LA and become one of the most celebrated contemporary artists in the country. Her response to my interview request was warm and encouraging. "Sarah, I'm impressed by the thoughtfulness of your questions and the scope of your project. I'd be happy to speak with you about my experience as an artist and my thoughts on the contemporary art world. Your project sounds like exactly the kind of serious academic work that the art world needs more of." When I read her email, I actually cried. Here was a successful, internationally recognized artist taking my work seriously, treating me as a peer rather than a high school student playing at being scholarly. The phone interview with Melina lasted for over an hour and was one of the most intellectually stimulating conversations I had ever had. She talked about the challenges of breaking into a gallery system that was still dominated by white male artists, the importance of creating art that spoke to underrepresented communities, and the balance between commercial success and artistic integrity. "The most important thing I learned," she told me, "is that the art world will try to put you in a box based on your background, your identity, or your perceived limitations. But if you refuse to accept those limitations, if you consistently produce work that exceeds expectations, eventually they have to acknowledge your excellence." Her words resonated with me in a way that was almost physical. This was exactly what I was trying to do: refuse to accept the limitations that others had placed on me and consistently exceed expectations until my excellence became undeniable. Over the next month, I conducted interviews with 5 more artists, 2 gallery directors, and a museum curator. Each conversation added new layers to my understanding of the art world and confirmed my growing conviction that I had found my path. I also started creating my own art with a new level of ambition and sophistication. Inspired by the artists I was studying, I began working on a series of paintings that explored themes of identity, expectation, and transformation. The pieces were technically challenging and conceptually complex, incorporating elements of realism, abstraction, and symbolic imagery that I had learned about through my research. Mr. Kowalski was amazed by the evolution in my work. "Sarah, these pieces are approaching professional quality," he said as he examined my latest painting, a large-scale canvas that had taken me 6 weeks to complete. Have you given any thought to applying to serious art programs for college? The question stopped me cold. College applications were due in just a few months, and my parents had made it clear that they weren't planning to invest in a traditional 4-year degree for me. But Mr. Kowalski's question opened up a possibility I hadn't seriously considered. What if I could get into an art school good enough to justify the investment? What if I could prove that I was worth betting on? That night, I researched the top art schools in the country: Rhode Island School of Design, Parsons, Art Institute of Chicago, California Institute of the Arts. These weren't community colleges or vocational programs. These were prestigious institutions that had produced some of the most successful artists, designers, and creative professionals in the world. The application requirements were daunting: portfolios of original artwork, essays, academic transcripts, and letters of recommendation. For most of these schools, the acceptance rate was lower than Harvard's. But as I read through the application materials, I felt the same spark of determination that had driven me since that devastating family dinner in October. This was my chance to prove that I was capable of achieving excellence in my own field, on my own terms. I started working on my portfolio immediately, creating new pieces specifically designed to showcase my range and artistic vision. I wrote and rewrote my application essays, crafting statements that articulated my artistic philosophy and career goals with the kind of clarity and sophistication that I had learned from my art history research. The hardest part was asking for letters of recommendation. Mrs. Vandenberg and Mr. Kowalski both agreed enthusiastically, but I also needed academic references from other teachers. When I approached my English teacher, Ms. Patterson, she seemed surprised by my request. "Sarah, these are very competitive programs," she said gently. "Are you sure you want to set yourself up for disappointment?" There it was again, the assumption. That disappointment was my natural fate, that I should protect myself by aiming lower. "Ms. Patterson," I replied, "I understand the risk. But I'd rather be rejected by a great program than accepted by a mediocre one." She agreed to write the letter, though I could tell she had reservations about my chances. As December approached and application deadlines loomed, I found myself working 18-hour days. I would go to school, stay after for art club and studio time, come home and work on my portfolio until midnight, then wake up early to continue before school started. My parents noticed my dedication, but seemed to view it as a harmless hobby rather than a serious academic pursuit. "It's good that you have something you're passionate about," my mother said one evening as she watched me carefully photograph my paintings for my portfolio submissions. "Even if it doesn't lead to a career, having creative outlets is important for personal fulfillment." Personal fulfillment. As if art was a nice hobby for someone who couldn't achieve real success in a serious field. But I kept working, driven by a vision of myself that was completely different from the one my family held. I could see myself walking through the halls of a prestigious art school, surrounded by other serious artists, engaged in conversations about technique and theory and the power of visual culture to change the world. I could see myself in gallery openings, standing next to my own work, explaining my artistic vision to collectors and critics who took me seriously as a creative professional. Most importantly, I could see myself proving that excellence comes in many forms, and that the daughter who was never going to be like Emily was going to be something Emily could never be, a true artist with something original to say about the world. On December 15, 2019, I submitted my final application to the Rhode Island School of Design. As I clicked the Submit button on my laptop, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that I had never experienced before. I had just bet everything on myself, in a way that no one in my family thought I was capable of. Now all I could do was wait to see if the art world agreed with my assessment of my own potential, or if I was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between dreams and reality. The weeks following my college applications were strange and suspended, like living in a bubble where normal time didn't apply. At Westchester Academy, my classmates were either celebrating their early admissions to prestigious universities or anxiously waiting for regular decision notifications from their dream schools. The hallways buzzed with conversations about Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, the same schools that had always seemed like distant galaxies to me, reserved for students like Emily who possessed that magical combination of natural intelligence and effortless achievement. But I was in a different kind of waiting period. While my classmates were hoping to be accepted into institutions that their families had always expected them to attend, I was hoping to prove that I belonged in a world that my family had never even considered for me. My art history project had evolved far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. What had started as an ambitious final paper had become a comprehensive exhibition proposal titled, Invisible to Undeniable, Contemporary Female Artists Breaking Barriers. I had interviewed 12 artists, contacted 15 galleries and museums, created detailed curatorial notes for a hypothetical exhibition, and produced a marketing strategy that included social media campaigns, educational programming, and community outreach initiatives. Mrs. Vandenberg was speechless when I presented the project to her in early January. The finished product included a 75-page research document, a complete exhibition catalog with original essays, floor plans for gallery installations, and a presentation that I had rehearsed until I could deliver it flawlessly. Miss Martinez, she said after reviewing the materials, this is the most sophisticated student project I have encountered in 30 years of teaching. This isn't just graduate-level work, this is professional-level work. She paused, studying me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. I owe you an apology, she continued. I have clearly underestimated your capabilities, and I suspect I'm not the only one who has made that mistake. Her words were validating, but they also highlighted something that had become increasingly clear to me over the previous months. I had been surrounded by people who had never bothered to look closely enough to see what I was actually capable of achieving. The same week I submitted my project to Mrs. Vandenberg, I received an email that would change everything. It was from Julia Harrison, the admissions director at Rhode Island School of Design, requesting a phone interview as part of my application review process. Ms. Martinez, she said when we spoke, your application materials are exceptional. Your portfolio shows remarkable technical skill and conceptual sophistication, and your essay demonstrates exactly the kind of critical thinking and artistic vision that we look for in our students. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid she could hear it through the phone. However, she continued, RISD is extremely competitive, and we want to make sure that students we admit are fully committed to the intensive program we offer. Can you tell me about your support system at home? How does your family feel about your decision to pursue art as a serious academic and career path? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. How could I explain that my family viewed my artistic interests as a consolation prize for my academic inadequacy? How could I describe their conviction that I should aim for realistic goals and accept my limitations? Instead, I told her the truth in a different way. Ms. Harrison, I said, my family has taught me that if you want something, you have to work for it yourself. They've shown me that achievement requires complete personal dedication and that no one will believe in your potential until you prove it to them. That's exactly the mindset I plan to bring to RISD. I see, she said, and I could hear her making notes. And how do you plan to finance your education? RISD tuition is significant, and we have limited financial aid available. This was the question I had been dreading. My parents had made it clear that they weren't planning to invest in a college education for me, especially not an expensive private art school that they viewed as an impractical indulgence. I'm prepared to take out student loans and work part-time to cover my expenses, I replied. I've researched the options, and I understand the financial commitment. This isn't a casual decision, this is an investment in my future career as a professional artist. The conversation lasted for 30 minutes, during which Julia Harrison asked me detailed questions about my artistic influences, my career goals, and my understanding of the contemporary art world. By the end of the call, I felt like I had been through the most intense job interview of my life. Thank you, Ms. Martinez, she said as we concluded. You should hear from us within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days to learn whether my gamble on myself had paid off or whether I was about to face the kind of rejection that would confirm every doubt my family had ever expressed about my potential. During those 2 weeks, I threw myself into my art with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I was working on a new series of paintings that explored themes of visibility and recognition, complex compositions that used symbolic imagery to examine what it meant to be overlooked, underestimated, and finally seen. The paintings were unlike anything I had created before, technically challenging and emotionally raw. One piece, titled The Supporting Character, showed a figure standing in the shadows while another figure basked in bright spotlights, but the shadowed figure was painted with intricate detail and luminous colors that made her far more compelling than the spotlit one. Another piece, Expectations, featured a woman breaking free from a frame that was too small to contain her, with fragments of the broken frame transforming into wings that lifted her toward an expansive sky. Mr. Kowalski was amazed by the new work. "Sarah, these pieces are museum quality," he said as he studied The Supporting Character. "The technical execution is flawless, but more importantly, you're expressing complex ideas through visual metaphor in a way that most artists don't achieve until much later in their careers. They're personal," I explained. "I'm painting about transformation, about what happens when someone refuses to accept the limitations that others place on them." "It shows," he replied. "The authenticity is what makes them so powerful." On February 3, 2020, exactly 14 days after my phone interview with Julia Harrison, I received an email from Rhode Island School of Design that would change my life forever. "Dear Sarah, congratulations. We are delighted to inform you that you have been accepted to Rhode Island School of Design for the fall 2020 semester. Your application demonstrated exactly the kind of artistic talent, intellectual curiosity, and personal dedication that defines the RISD community." I read the email 3 times before I believed it was real. Then I screamed so loudly that my mother came running upstairs, convinced that I had been injured. "Sarah, what's wrong?" she asked, bursting into my room with a look of panic. "Nothing's wrong," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Everything's right. I got into RISD." "RISD," she repeated, clearly not recognizing the acronym. "Rhode Island School of Design. It's one of the best art schools in the world. And they accepted me." My mother stared at me for a moment, processing this information. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. But we haven't discussed college tuition, and art school is very expensive." "I know," I replied. "I'm going to pay for it myself. Student loans, work study, whatever it takes." That evening at dinner, I shared my news with the rest of my family. My father's reaction was similar to my mother's, congratulations mixed with concern about the financial practicality of attending an expensive private art school. "Sarah, we're proud of you for being accepted," he said, "but you need to think seriously about whether it's wise to take on that much debt for a degree that might not lead to stable employment." Emily, who was home for winter break, was more enthusiastic. "Wow, Sarah, RISD is really prestigious," she said. "I have friends at Harvard who tried to get into their graduate programs and couldn't. This is actually really impressive." Coming from Emily, who had never shown much interest in my artistic pursuits, this acknowledgement felt significant. For the first time, I had achieved something that impressed my academically accomplished sister. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Vandenberg had heard about my acceptance through the school's administrative network, and she asked me to stay after class the next day. "Sarah," she said, "I want you to know that your acceptance to RISD doesn't surprise me, given the quality of work you've been producing. But I also want to tell you something important." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "In 30 years of teaching, I've watched hundreds of students navigate their academic and personal development. I've seen students with natural talent waste their potential through lack of effort, and I've seen students with modest abilities achieve extraordinary things through dedication and vision." She looked at me directly, her expression serious and kind. "You belong in that second category. What you've accomplished this year, the transformation in your approach to learning, your willingness to tackle ambitious projects, your development as both an artist and a scholar, represents exactly the kind of growth that education is supposed to foster." Her words meant more to me than any grade or award could have. This was a teacher who had seen Emily's effortless excellence for years, and she was telling me that my hard-won achievements were equally valuable. More importantly, she continued. You've proven something crucial about yourself. You have the ability to exceed expectations when you're passionate about what you're doing. That's a rare quality, and it will serve you well in art school and beyond. Over the next few months, as I prepared for my transition to RISD, I continued working on my art with the confidence that comes from knowing you're on the right path. My paintings were becoming more sophisticated and ambitious, incorporating techniques and concepts that I was learning through independent study and online workshops. In April, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Vandenberg recommended my art history project to the National Art Education Association, which selected it as a winner in their annual student research competition. The prize included a $2,000 scholarship and the opportunity to present my research at their national conference in Chicago. When I stood on the stage at the Palmer House Hilton, presenting my research to an audience of professional art educators from across the country, I felt like I was glimpsing my future self. These were my people, serious, passionate advocates for the power of art education who understood that visual culture wasn't a hobby or a consolation prize, but a legitimate field of intellectual inquiry. The response to my presentation was overwhelming. During the Q&A session, professors from major universities asked sophisticated questions about my research methodology and theoretical framework. Gallery directors and museum educators approached me afterward to discuss my exhibition proposal and suggest ways I could develop it further. This is graduate-level research, said Dr. Patricia Williams, a professor from UCLA who had served as one of the competition judges. You should seriously consider pursuing a graduate degree in art history or museum studies after you complete your undergraduate work. Graduate school. Another possibility that had never been on my family's radar for me, but which suddenly seemed not just achievable but inevitable. On my flight back from Chicago, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 months. In October, I had been the disappointing daughter with realistic limitations who should focus on practical career paths. In April, I was a scholarship-winning researcher heading to one of the most prestigious art schools in the world, with professors encouraging me to consider graduate study at major universities. The transformation hadn't been magic or luck. It had been the result of refusing to accept other people's assessments of my potential and instead committing to discovering what I was actually capable of achieving. When I got home from Chicago, I found my family waiting for me in the living room. My parents and Emily were sitting together, clearly having had a conversation about my recent achievements. Sarah, my father said, we owe you an apology. We've been thinking about your success lately, the RISD acceptance, the scholarship, this research award, and we realize that we've seriously underestimated you. My mother nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. We made assumptions about your academic potential based on traditional measures that clearly didn't capture your real abilities. We're sorry for not recognizing your talent sooner. Emily was the most direct. Sarah, I need to admit something. I've always thought of myself as the smart one in the family, and I treated you like you were less capable. But what you've accomplished this year is honestly more impressive than anything I've done at Harvard. Her admission was shocking. Emily, who had always been the standard of excellence in our family, was acknowledging that my achievements were more impressive than hers. The difference, she continued, is that everything has always come easily to me. Good grades, test scores, college admission, it was all pretty much automatic. But you've had to fight for every achievement, and that's made you stronger and more determined than I ever had to be. That night, I lay in bed thinking about Emily's words and what they meant for how I understood myself and my place in our family. She was right that her success had come easily, but she was also right that my struggles had made me stronger. More importantly, I realized that I had stopped thinking about Emily as the standard I needed to measure myself against. I was creating my own standards, pursuing my own version of excellence in my own field. When I started at RISD in September 2020, I wasn't the girl who would never be like Emily. I was Sarah Martinez, a serious artist and scholar with her own vision and her own path to success. And that transformation, from invisible to undeniable, was just the beginning. Rhode Island School of Design in September 2020 was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The campus, with its distinctive brick buildings scattered throughout Providence's Federal Hill neighborhood, buzzed with an energy that was completely different from the competitive academic atmosphere of Westchester Academy. Here, students carried portfolios instead of textbooks, engaged in passionate debates about color theory and conceptual art in the cafeteria, and stayed up until 3 a.m. not because they were cramming for exams, but because they were so absorbed in their creative work that they lost track of time. From my first day, I knew I belonged there in a way I had never belonged anywhere else. My dorm room in Metcalf Hall was small and sparse, but the walls were soon covered with sketches, inspiration images, and works in progress. My roommate, Maya Chen, was a sculpture major from San Francisco whose parents were both successful tech entrepreneurs but who had chosen art over the family business. She understood what it meant to fight for your right to pursue creativity as a serious career. My parents wanted me to study computer science and join their startup, she told me during our first week. They kept saying that art was a nice hobby, but not a real profession. It took me getting into RISD to prove to them that I was serious about this path. Maya's story resonated with my own experience, and we quickly became close friends and creative collaborators. But more importantly, being at RISD surrounded me with professors and fellow students who took art seriously as an intellectual discipline, who understood that visual culture required the same rigor and sophistication as any other academic field. My first-year foundation courses were more challenging than anything I had encountered in high school. Drawing for architecture students, taught by Professor Maria Santos, pushed us to see and represent space in ways that required both technical precision and conceptual understanding. Color theory with Professor James Wright involved complex exercises in perception and psychology that combined scientific principles with aesthetic judgment. But it was my art history seminar, Contemporary Art in Global Context, that really opened my eyes to the possibilities of my academic future. Professor Elizabeth Harper was a renowned scholar who had curated exhibitions at MoMA and the Whitney, and her approach to art history was rigorous, theoretical, and deeply connected to current cultural and political issues. Art isn't decoration, she told us during our first class. Art is a form of visual language that reflects, challenges, and shapes the way societies understand themselves. Your job as artists and art historians is to become fluent in that language, and to use it to say something meaningful about the world you inhabit. Her words articulated something I had been feeling but hadn't been able to express, that my interest in art wasn't just aesthetic or personal, but intellectual and political. I wasn't just learning to make beautiful objects, I was learning to participate in cultural conversations that mattered. During my first semester, I threw myself into my coursework with the same intensity that had driven me through my senior year of high school. I spent hours in the studios, experimenting with new techniques and developing a personal visual vocabulary. I wrote research papers that combined art historical analysis with contemporary cultural criticism. I attended lectures, gallery openings, and artist talks whenever possible, slowly building my understanding of the professional art world. But the real breakthrough came in February 2021, during my second semester, when Professor Harper announced a special opportunity for students. In her seminar, the Rhode Island Center for Contemporary Art is organizing an exhibition for this summer titled Emerging Voices, New Perspectives on Identity and Place, she told us. They're looking for student work that demonstrates sophisticated conceptual thinking and technical execution. I'm recommending 3 students from this class to submit proposals, and if selected, your work would be exhibited alongside pieces by established contemporary artists. Being chosen to submit a proposal felt like validation of everything I had been working toward. The exhibition theme was perfect for the series of paintings I had been developing about transformation, visibility, and the experience of exceeding expectations that others had set for you. My proposal, titled Invisible to Undeniable, A Personal Journey Through Expectation and Achievement, included 5 large-scale paintings that used symbolic imagery and complex compositional techniques to explore themes of family dynamics, personal growth, and artistic emergence. The centerpiece was a painting called The Moment of Recognition, which showed a figure stepping out of the shadows into brilliant light, with the shadows themselves transformed into wings that lifted her toward an expansive, luminous sky. When I submitted my proposal in March, I felt the same mixture of terror and exhilaration that I had experienced when applying to RISD. This was another bet on myself, another opportunity to prove that I belonged in the serious art world rather than the category of students with realistic limitations. 2 weeks later, Professor Harper called me into her office with news that would change everything. "Sarah," she said, "not only has your proposal been accepted for the exhibition, but the curator, David Chen, specifically mentioned that your work stood out for its emotional depth and technical sophistication. He's interested in featuring your piece, The Moment of Recognition, prominently in the exhibition catalog." I was speechless. Not only would my work be exhibited alongside established artists, but it would be featured in the official catalog that would be distributed to galleries, museums, and collectors throughout New England. "There's more," Professor Harper continued. "David was so impressed with your proposal that he's offered you a summer internship at the center. You'd be working directly with the curatorial team, learning about exhibition planning, gallery management, and the business side of the contemporary art world. The internship would be unpaid, but it represented exactly the kind of professional experience that could launch a serious career in the art world." I accepted immediately. That weekend, I called my family to share the news. The response was unlike anything I had experienced before. "Sarah, this is incredible," my mother said, her voice filled with genuine excitement. "An exhibition with professional artists? And an internship at a real gallery?" My father was equally enthusiastic. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. It sounds like you're really making a name for yourself in the art world." But it was Emily's response that surprised me most. She was finishing her junior year at Harvard and had recently been accepted to several prestigious summer internship programs, including one at Goldman Sachs that was considered a pathway to lucrative career opportunities in finance. "Sarah, I have to admit something," she said during our family video call. "I've been following your progress at RISD through your social media posts and the updates you've been giving Mom and Dad, and I'm honestly amazed by what you've accomplished." She paused, looking genuinely thoughtful. "At Harvard, everything is about networking and positioning yourself for the next opportunity. But what you're doing is creating something original, something that comes from your own vision and talent. That's actually much more impressive than getting good grades or landing a prestigious internship." For Emily to acknowledge that my path was more impressive than traditional academic success was a reversal that I never could have imagined 2 years earlier. The summer internship at the Rhode Island Center for Contemporary Art was transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working directly with David Chen and his curatorial team, I learned about every aspect of organizing a professional exhibition, selecting and sequencing artworks, writing wall texts and catalog essays, coordinating with artists and lenders, managing installation logistics, and developing educational programming. But more importantly, I was treated as a serious contributor to the exhibition rather than just a student learning the ropes. David regularly asked for my opinions on curatorial decisions, and my insights about the thematic connections between different artworks were incorporated into the final exhibition design. "Sarah, you have an exceptional eye for how art works. Speak to each other," David told me midway through the summer. "You understand that curating isn't just about displaying beautiful objects, it's about creating visual conversations that help viewers see familiar ideas in new ways." When the exhibition opened in July 2021, my family made the trip from Westchester to Providence for the opening reception. Seeing them walk through the gallery, stopping at my painting and reading the professional wall text that described my work in the context of contemporary art movements, was surreal. But the moment that will stay with me forever occurred when a collector approached me during the reception. "Are you Sarah Martinez?" she asked. "I'm Rebecca Williams, and I've been following your work since seeing it featured in the exhibition catalog. I'm interested in acquiring The Moment of Recognition for my collection." Rebecca Williams was a well-known collector whose private collection included works by major contemporary artists. The fact that she wanted to purchase my painting meant that my work was being taken seriously by the professional art market. Your painting speaks to something universal about the experience of being underestimated and then proving your capabilities, she explained. But it does so through visual language that's sophisticated and original. That combination of personal authenticity and artistic maturity is rare, especially in someone so young. The sale of my painting not only provided me with enough money to cover a full year of tuition at RISD, but established me as an emerging artist whose work had commercial as well as critical value. Over the next year, my reputation continued to grow. My work was included in 2 more group exhibitions, and I began receiving inquiries from galleries about the possibility of a solo show. Art critics began mentioning me in reviews as one of the most promising student artists in New England. But the recognition that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. In April 2022, during my sophomore year at RISD, I received an email from Mrs. Vandenberg, my high school art history teacher. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I hope you won't mind hearing from your old teacher, but I wanted to share some exciting news. Westchester Academy has decided to establish an annual award for graduating seniors who demonstrate exceptional achievement in creative fields. The award will be called the Sarah Martinez Prize for Excellence in Arts and Humanities, and I've been asked to serve on the selection committee." I read the email 3 times, hardly believing what I was seeing. Westchester Academy was naming an award after me, the student who had been told to lower her expectations and pursue practical, realistic goals. "The administration and faculty have been following your achievements at RISD with great interest," Mrs. Vandenberg continued. "Your success has challenged all of us to think more carefully about how we identify and nurture student potential. We realize that we nearly missed recognizing an exceptional talent, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen again." The letter concluded with an invitation to speak at Westchester Academy's graduation ceremony as the inaugural Sarah Martinez Prize recipient, sharing my story with the graduating class and their families. Standing at the podium in Westchester Academy's auditorium that June, looking out at an audience that included my parents, Emily, Mrs. Vandenberg, and hundreds of other families, I felt the full weight of how completely my life had changed. 3 years ago, I sat in a classroom in this building and was told that I would never be like my sister Emily. I was told that I should accept my limitations and pursue realistic goals rather than reaching for achievements that seemed impossible. I paused, seeing my parents in the audience, both of them wiping away tears. Today, I want to tell you that the most dangerous thing you can do is accept other people's assessment of your potential. The second most dangerous thing is to let your fear of failure prevent you from discovering what you're actually capable of achieving. I talked about the importance of finding your own path to excellence, about the difference between effortless success and hard-won achievement, and about the satisfaction that comes from proving that you're capable of more than anyone imagined. The person who told me I would never be like Emily was right, I concluded. I didn't become like Emily. I became myself, and that turned out to be something much more valuable. After the ceremony, Emily found me in the reception hall. "Sarah," she said, "I need to tell you something that I've been thinking about for a long time." Her expression was serious, almost vulnerable. "For years, I defined myself as the successful Martinez daughter, the one who met all the family's expectations and achieved all the traditional markers of excellence. But watching your journey has made me realize something important: you've achieved something I never have." "What's that?" I asked. "You've created your own definition of success, and you've pursued it despite everyone telling you it was impossible. That takes a kind of courage and determination that I've never had to develop. My achievements have been impressive, but they've also been predictable. Yours have been transformative." She paused, looking around the reception hall where our former classmates and their families were celebrating traditional academic achievements. "I'm starting to think that you got the better deal," she said with a smile. "You had to fight for everything, and that made you stronger and more creative than I ever had to become." That evening, as my family and I drove back to Westchester from the graduation ceremony, my father said something that perfectly captured how completely our family dynamic had changed. "Sarah, when you were in high school, we worried that you would never find your place in the world. Now we realize that you weren't failing to find your place, you were creating it." We spent so much time comparing you to Emily's path that we never bothered to imagine what your own path might look like, my mother added. We're sorry it took us so long to see what you were capable of. That fall, I returned to RISD for my junior year with a confidence and sense of purpose that I never could have imagined 3 years earlier. I was no longer the disappointing daughter trying to prove her worth. I was an emerging artist with a growing reputation, a clear vision for my future, and the knowledge that I had exceeded every expectation that had ever been set for me. In November 2022, I received the news that would complete my transformation from invisible to undeniable. I had been selected for a solo exhibition at the Providence Contemporary Art Gallery, one of the most prestigious venues for emerging artists in New England. The exhibition, titled Invisible to Undeniable, The Art of Sarah Martinez, would open in March 2023 and would be my first major solo show. The exhibition would feature 20 paintings created over the previous 3 years, documenting my artistic and personal evolution from a student trying to find her voice to a confident emerging artist with something important to say about identity, expectation, and transformation. When the exhibition opened on March 15, 2023, the gallery was packed with collectors, critics, professors, fellow artists, and my family. Standing in front of my paintings, surrounded by people who were there specifically to see my work, I felt like I was living in a different universe from the one I had inhabited just 4 years earlier. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. The Providence Journal called my work emotionally resonant and technically accomplished, while Art New England described me as one of the most promising young artists to emerge from RISD in recent years. But the moment that meant the most to me came when I overheard a conversation between 2 strangers who were looking at my centerpiece painting, the moment of recognition. This artist has something important to say about what it means to be underestimated and then prove your worth, one of them said to the other. The painting technique is sophisticated, but it's the emotional authenticity that makes it so powerful. It's rare to see someone so young who has such a clear artistic voice, the other person replied. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more from Sarah Martinez. As I listened to them discuss my work with the kind of serious critical attention that I had always dreamed of receiving, I realized that my transformation was complete. I was no longer fighting to prove that I belonged in the art world, I was contributing to it as a recognized and respected emerging voice. That night, after the opening reception ended and the gallery had closed, I stood alone in the space surrounded by my paintings. Each piece told part of the story of my journey from invisible to undeniable, from the disappointing daughter to the artist whose work was being celebrated by critics and collectors. I thought about that devastating family dinner in October 2019, when I had been told that I would never be like Emily and should accept my limitations. I thought about the months of struggling to prove that I was worth investing in, the applications and rejections and small victories that had gradually built into larger ones. Most of all, I thought about the lesson that had emerged from my journey, that the most powerful form of success is the kind you create for yourself, on your own terms, in pursuit of your own vision of excellence. They were right when they said I would never be like Emily. I had become something better, myself, fully realized and undeniably visible. And as I turned off the gallery lights and locked the door behind me, I knew that this solo exhibition was not the culmination of my journey, but the beginning of a career that would be built on my own terms, driven by my own vision, and measured by my own definition of what it means to succeed. The girl who had once been invisible had become impossible to ignore, and the transformation was only just beginning. 6 months later, I received a call from Dr. Amanda Foster at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She wanted to include my work in MoMA's Emerging Voices, the Next Generation of American Artists exhibition. Your work demonstrates the authentic voice we seek when identifying artists who will shape contemporary art's future, she said. Standing in my dorm room, I could barely process that my paintings would hang in one of the world's most prestigious museums, seen by hundreds of thousands of visitors and included in permanent catalogs studied by art historians. When I shared this news with my family, my father's response was profound. Sarah, MoMA is where we took you as a child. You stood before Van Gogh's Starry Night, asking how someone could paint something so beautiful. Now your work will hang in those same galleries. The memory flooded back, 8 years old, holding Emily's hand, mesmerized by art's power to transform simple materials into expressions that moved people to tears. Emily's response completed our family's transformation. Working at Goldman Sachs after Harvard, she said, watching your career made me realize I've never pursued my passion, only paths meeting others' expectations. You've inspired me to leave finance and apply to social work programs. My transformation from a disappointing daughter to internationally recognized artist hadn't just changed my life, it gave my family permission to reconsider their definitions of success. Years later, when critics asked about my artistic vision's source, I always returned to that dining room moment when told I'd never be like Emily. That devastating experience of invisibility became the foundation for art speaking to anyone ever told they weren't enough. The girl once called a disappointment became living proof that powerful transformations begin with refusing to accept others' limitations as final truth.